Do we have too much government?
We need to put people ahead of corporate profits.
This system is so lopsided.
This threat is a real threat to democracy.
And I think that's really important. That's something we haven't been doing in this country for a long time.
Where do you start? What do you do? How do you do it?
Access to Democracy and other Eagan community television programming is supported by Thomson Reuters, makers of Westlawn Next and based in Eagan. Through Westlawn Next and other innovative online services, Thomson Reuters is the world's leading source of intelligent information for businesses and professionals. Online at thomsonreuters.com. And by U.S. Federal Credit Union, the member-owned financial institution offering service, value, and experience you can trust to the greater Twin Cities community.
Welcome back to Access to Democracy. I'm your host, Alan Miller, as usual. They try to keep getting rid of me, but it doesn't work, and we're outlasting them all. What can I say? We have a first-time guest, a really fascinating gentleman, Stephen Blair Venable, who has accomplished more in 48 years of life than most people or most groups do in several lifetimes. But he's about to embark on the biggest challenge of his entire life because he's engaged to be married.
I am indeed.
Congratulations.
After 48 years, the first time I've met the girl for me. So thank you.
Well, good luck, and
thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you kindly.
A good woman can really drive the bus for you.
No
really,
question
really.
about
and,
it.
Now, you have so many areas of expertise. I really don't know where to start. You're an
too
attorney.
kind.
You're an attorney.
Yes.
You have been with Dorsey and Whitney,
Yes.
One of our largest law firms. And as a matter of fact, I've had several people from Dorsey and Whitney in here as guests over the years because of the Innocence Project.
Yes.
You've been with Robbins, Kaplan, Miller, and Cerisi. Mike Cerisi, who's a good friend and has been here many times. Although Mike is moving to the right a little bit as he gets older, which is troubling to me.
Indeed.
But, so, give us a little background.
Well, I guess I should start by saying I have been a very, very, very lucky person. You know, when I was coming up, there were very few people of color who were doing well. And my father and mother met at Howard University, a traditionally black school in Washington, D.C., and both got graduate degrees. And at that time, when my dad came out of school, he had to drive a cab with a master's degree in economics. But he ended up being a fellow at Princeton and was finally appointed to a position by Richard Nixon at the Department of Commerce. So Richard Nixon back then, by executive order, created something called OMBE, the Office of Minority Business Enterprise, which is now the agency known as the Minority Business Development
By
Agency.
Executive order. My goodness, the
By
whole
executive
right
order.
wing today would be hysterical.
But he, you know, he did something really great in doing that because he understood, politics aside, that you don't want to have a large potential source of economic productivity that's untapped. And that certainly was, I think, a fair way to characterize the African American community at that time. So my dad actually became the first minority national director of the Office of Minority Business Enterprise. And it was through his office that the money to expand the National Minority Supplier Development Council's network across the country, it's where the money came from. And interestingly, I ended up many, many years later running the Midwest Minority Supplier Development
As I
Council
saw when I was
in
researching.
Minneapolis. So,
And your father and your mother both were determined that you were going to get an education,
there were.
and they saw to it that you did.
They did, but of course, it certainly made it a lot easier that my father had a position like that in government, and from that post he became an executive at General Motors when there really weren't black executives anywhere. So, I moved from Washington, D.C. to Detroit when my dad left government, and here I am in inner city Detroit, the son of a father who's a General Motors executive back in the days when they practically printed money. And, my mother was an English teacher and has a PhD, so I had a lot of opportunity that a lot of people haven't had. So,
Where did you do your undergraduate?
Undergraduate at Michigan, University of Michigan, got a degree in English literature, and went from there to the University of California at Berkeley for law school. And, once again, when I showed up in Detroit, this was back at a time that General Motors was actually asking all of its new executives to actually live in the city because they wanted to revitalize the city. So I went to an inner city public school, and from there to a Jesuit private boys' school. So I've seen a little bit of everything, and once again, I've just been very, very lucky.
And how did you end up in Minnesota?
Well,
Question I ask myself all the time.
especially given the cold, right? Well, when I was in law school, so I went to law school in 1987, and somewhere, around 1989 or so, it was the end of the big boom for corporate law firms. In the 80s, there were a lot of firms that built up a lot of staff because they were doing big deals. So right around the time that I was graduating, firms were shrinking. And my friends who had graduated in California years earlier were getting laid off by big firms in San Francisco and Los Angeles and so on. So I ended up being recruited by Dorsey and Whitney out of law school. And I moved to Minnesota without knowing a soul, and came to understand pretty quickly why people who live here love this place.
And you'll see me here too.
Indeed.
Actually, during my first year of college, my father, who was a buyer for the Allied chain, got directed here.
Okay.
So we lived in Minneapolis for a year and a half.
Right.
And I endured a couple of winters here.
Yes.
So when 17 years ago, Sharon and I had the opportunity to make the move back here, when Thomson bought West Publishing,
Yes.
we did. And we have not regretted it. Maybe a few times this winter, and
As have I.
but it is a great place to live, and the quality of life is wonderful
Very
here.
high. And it's interesting that you say that you haven't regretted it, because I moved to San Diego in about 1995 for 2 years. And you move to San Diego, it's sunny every day, it's warm every day, and you think you can be happy living like that, but when you've grown up with the seasons, you start to miss that. And also, my personal theory is that the adversity that we deal with on a day-to-day basis, at least in the winter, it breeds community. When you're cold and the conditions are harsh, you want to have your friends and your neighbors close. And I found it a little hard to get to know people in San Diego by comparison.
And of course, Minnesotans have one of the longest lifespans of any state in the country. Now, my theory is that it's because their brains are frozen half the time that they manage to live longer. But
Right.
some native Minnesotans get a little insulted when I say that. But
It's funny nonetheless.
it's now. You, among other things, Keith Ellison, Congressman
I
Ellison,
do.
who's a guest here on many occasions.
Since the 4th grade.
And Keith asked you in 2010 to go on a trade mission.
He did.
And tell us a little bit about that.
To
How
the
did you
Middle
come to
East.
that?
It's interesting because, I've known Keith since he was in the 4th grade. So Keith and I practically grew up together. And I knew Keith and his parents and his brothers in Detroit. We played football in my backyard and so on. And Keith and I had run into each other a couple of times. I think when Keith was with Lindquist and Venom years ago, I ran into him in the Skyway system. I was either with Dorsey or Robbins at that time. But we'd kind of lost touch. So in about 2009, I accepted a position to be the president of the Midwest Minority Supplier Development Council. And generally what they do is they try to help minority-owned businesses get supplier contracts with major companies that are generally corporate members. So as it turns out, Keith had been going...
Which you did very effectively.
Which I did.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I had a lot of help.
Many accolades about the progress that you've made in that position.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Had a lot of good people and once again a lot of luck. But at any rate, Keith was trying to build a bilateral trade relationship with the Saudis, which from an economic perspective, I think is really a fabulous idea regardless of one's politics, because the Saudis have been talking for years about building what they call economic cities. And this is a country that has the money to look out into the desert and decide they're going to build a major city where there's nothing. And so you can imagine the supplier relationships that are possible when you have people who want to build the city.
The only people who could do that here were the mafia in Las Vegas. In Las Vegas. But,
well, Keith has high aspirations, and so one of the things that I've always loved about Keith is a guy who's all about inclusivity. And so I got a call from Keith, and once again, when I was at the MMSDC, I was representing 300 minority-owned businesses in Minnesota, North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, and Western Iowa. And Keith came to me and he said, listen, he said, I want us to figure out how to do business with the Saudis as they're getting ready to spend all this money, but I want everybody to have a piece of this action. Women, minorities, everyone. And so he said, why don't you come along and see if you can't facilitate the building of some kind of connection between the Saudis and the businesses you represent.
what we call networking.
Exactly.
And networking is so important, no matter what you're doing. Yeah.
As a matter of fact, at 48 years old, I'm not sure there's anything more important in terms of trying to craft your individual destiny, with the exception of education. So,
48 years old. I have shoes older than you.
they must be very high quality shoes. Perhaps Alan Edmonds?
In addition to that, you've been very involved in healthcare,
Yes,
particularly in the inner city.
right.
So let's talk about that.
Healthcare. Well, you know, I think we'd all agree.
Board of Directors, People's Health
Yes.
Services.
Yes. So most people know that organization by the name Cedar Riverside People Center. Been around for a very, very long time. It's what we call an FQHC, a federally qualified health center. And this is an organization, it's a part of a federal program that was set up to essentially serve the poor, people without medical insurance, people who can't afford to pay on a cash basis. And so we actually have a sliding fee scale, and we serve people irrespective of their ability to pay. They pay what they can pay. We get a lot of money from the federal government.
In some cases, they can't pay at all.
In some cases, they can't pay at all. But this is kind of where the rubber meets the road.
What healthcare should be for this whole country,
Absolutely.
and what single payer should be in existence here, as I was talking to the Kaplans
Right.
earlier today.
Right.
It's just shameful that this country doesn't have single payer, but
We have a mess on our hands, and I
Yeah.
think, fortunately for underserved communities, the FQHCs of the country save a lot of people, you know?
and despite that involvement, or continuing with that involvement, along about 2007, you founded Sergo.
I did.
S-U-R-G-O.
Yes. So Sergo is a Latin word that means to rise up. And what I did back then was I wanted to start an employee training and development company. One of the things that I've always been interested in, at least, going all the way back to college, is in making the workplace a better place. It sounds a little odd to say that I became interested in that in college, because people would say, well, geez, you know, what do you know about the workplace in college? When I was in high school, I was working at a large utility in Detroit, Michigan, and I saw a woman have a nervous breakdown. And it was one of the most terrifying things I've ever witnessed in my life, but it was one of many inklings to me that there was something present in the corporate workplace, especially the large corporate workplace, that was wreaking havoc on a lot of people and productivity in the workplace.
Ergo, years later, Sergo.
Right.
Now, what does Sergo do?
Well, Sergo is an employee training and development company, and I've got a partner, a guy named Carl Mully, who's a clinical psychologist, and he really has become an organizational psychologist. When I met Carl years ago, he was already in the business. He was a trainer, and Carl and I became friends, and I said to Carl one day, I said, you know, Carl, you're a psychologist, I'm a lawyer and a business person, and we could form a one-stop shop that would be pretty incredible. So our company does employee training in, you know, some 25 substantive areas, everything from emotional intelligence in leadership development to process improvement to sexual harassment to diversity and multiculturalism.
You also do motivational speaking.
I do, and that is actually a direction that I'm trying to go in as we speak. I realized while I was at Sergo that it wasn't enough to be a trainer, so to speak. And that was really the impetus to write the book, The Commencement Odyssey. I am on a mission.
Let's talk about that, because I was going to bring that up next. You wrote this book, The Commencement Odyssey,
Right.
and I think James can probably give us a close-up on the cover. This book really comes out of your experience in attacking some of the problems of the business world and some of the misconceptions people have about the business world and how we can go about it differently.
Right.
You know, we just had the book up there. And by the way, where can people get the book?
It's generally available online. So the books can be bought from Sergo Books, and if you go to sergobooks.com or sergoconsulting.com, there are also links there. It can be bought from Amazon, it can be bought from Barnes & Noble as an ebook, and also Apple's website as an ebook.
And the book, along with Sergo itself, aims to do what?
That's a tough question, but I think I can make this fairly simple. And forgive me for sounding like an idealist, but I make no apologies for that. I am. I want to be a catalyst for changing, for transforming the American workplace once and for all. It's a rather interesting and esoteric story, and I guess, if I may, I can work my way into it like this. So in 2013, a sister unit of the Economy magazine set out to determine which country offered the best prospects for a baby born in 2013. So we're talking about, you know, a healthy life, hopefully wealthy life, good quality of living, lots of opportunity, safe life. And we didn't do so well. We turned out to land in 16th place with Germany. And one of the interesting things about that is when you look at the Economist magazine's methodology, they openly admit that the national wealth was weighted more than anything else. So despite being the wealthiest nation in the world, we were 16th in terms of the prospects we offer a baby. You think about that for a second, and you also consider that in 2012, Columbia University put out a survey and a study about world happiness. And of 50 countries that they studied, I believe the United States was 23rd. Once again, despite being the land of opportunity, despite being the richest country in the world, and
we've seen our educational statistics dropping.
Right.
We
Right.
have seen, for instance, I think we're 18th in the world in terms of child mortality
Right.
at birth. There are so many negative statistics that have cropped up
Right.
in the last 20 or 30 years, that it is, to me, a very frightening thing. And for instance, we were at a social gathering recently, and in the middle of a conversation, man's cell phone goes off. Oh, it's my boss, I have to take it. And he had to get up and go out of the room, and he was out about 10 or 15 minutes, and I'm finally waving like this, come on back, we're waiting for you. And he said, my life is 24/7. Your working life should not be 24/7. Your
Agreed.
working life should give you time for relaxation and family. And we seem to be going in the other direction, and I don't think that's a healthy thing at all.
I could not agree with you more. It's very interesting. So you think for a moment about the pressing issues of our time. Certainly one of them would be healthcare and healthcare costs. One of them would be economic productivity. One of them would be, the dissolution of the traditional family. It is my contention. Education.
Right up there.
It is my contention that when you drill down, you can make the case that the workplace is essentially the hub of a very complex and sometimes abstract wheel of negative societal outcomes. So, for example, stress in the workplace. So there have been a couple of studies recently about stress in the workplace. And the studies say that the tab in terms of lost productivity due to what they call presenteeism, which means you're at work, but you're stressed, you make mistakes, you can't think, you're distracted. Absenteeism, of course, we know what that is. People getting hurt and filing workers' comp claims. $300 billion a year in lost productivity. And for people who look at that number, let's put this in context. And I'm going to try to do a little bit of math in my head. I'm not a mathematician, so I hope I'm going to be right. But
I won't know if you're not.
Exactly. but geez, what is that? About 2% of GDP? It's an extraordinary amount of money. And, the question is, what is it that we're missing? And it is my contention that we're missing something that no one has really addressed, of all of the business schools, of all the law review articles, and so on. And that is that the workplace, especially the large corporate workplace, is not fit for healthy human habitation. When I was working years ago, I lived through what I consider to be the ergonomic revolution. And during that time, companies were spending a lot of money on chairs and all kinds of desks and things,
Yep.
Which was a good thing. But the thing that we don't seem to know what to do about is what I think is the real problem. And that is that the corporate workplace is not ergonomically suitable for the human psyche, not the human body. So for a lot of employees, the corporate workplace is like a bicycle with square wheels and no handlebars.
And you see that some corporations are starting to get the message.
Yes.
Some corporations, for instance, now will have facilities for children where
Right.
a parent can bring in their child for daycare.
Right.
Some corporations will do other things. Bring your dog to work.
Right.
There was a time when you couldn't walk into a building where you had a job with your dog, but they have found that having that dog around is not only relaxing for you, but it's a lot of fun for your other employees. And things like that are making the difference. The Commencement Odyssey really goes straight at that. And you call it the Commencement Odyssey because it's really for students who are graduating college and about to go out into the world.
Right.
To say, hey, there is a better way for you guys. And I use guys generically, by
Yes.
the way, even with my own kids.
Yes.
And, take a look at this, and maybe you have some ideas. And then hopefully some heads of corporations will get on board with it, and maybe we can change that so that your job is a place that you look forward to going, but also that you can relax and have a good time with, and also not be 24/7,
Right.
where you can get away from your cell phone, or even if it's on you, that they're not going to be calling you in the middle of the night and, hey, get in here right away, or
Exactly.
et cetera.
It's funny because it, as a general rule, is tough to get business leaders to be interested in things that have no financial impact. I mean, you know, business can be an extraordinarily good thing, and I am certainly a supporter of business. It's just a question of how do you responsibly steer it and utilize it. The corporate workplace is, at this point, a fairly inefficient means of value creation.
And if you want the bottom line to increase,
Right.
the best way to go about it is not really to beat the cattle with whips,
Right.
but it's to make their life more pleasant so that they look on a partnership
That's right.
with you. It benefits all. It doesn't benefit just the bottom line. And we have lost that to a very large degree in this society.
I agree. And that's one of the things that I hope to be a part of. I mean, for corporate leaders, it would be nice if people wanted to pursue these changes because they were the right thing to do. But it's also a matter of economic productivity and their profitability and shareholder value. One of the things that I talk about in the book, and I have to resort to a slight conversation about physics, is that if you think for a moment about being a member of a crew team, and let's say you're in a boat with a bunch of folks who are on your team, and you're in a race.
Our boat is nearing the dock, so
Oh my goodness. Okay.
we,
I'll just make this very quick. I simply wanted to say that corporate culture essentially forces people to spend a lot of their paid time doing things that aren't related to value creation. So we're playing politics. We're competing against each other. Wouldn't it make more sense to get everybody on the boat to compete to reach a standard of performance rather than competing against each other? Because all of that energy that we expend playing politics and competing against each other would help drive the boat forward and win against external competitors.
and there we go. Stephen Blair, Venable, the Commencement Odyssey, Sergo, and really wish you very well.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming in. It's been a pleasure just to have this discourse with you, and most of all, when's the big day?
The big day. I'm getting married on March 21st, and I just can't wait. But
good luck.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure and an honor.
It's been our
I so
pleasure, and
appreciate it.
thank you.
Thank you.